Hey team, welcome back into Layers LCG. I'm your host Zane Inglis, and today I'm turning dreams into reality. A few quick tips to help you achieve that six-figure salary or whatever your career aspirations may be. So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how you turn dreams into visions, into goals, and then into reality. Too often I come across people, and I was one of them when I was younger, who would sit there and they'd dream of things they wish they had, they'd love to have. They look at successful people with envy, thinking, wow, that would be wonderful, but I could never have that. If you look at someone who's earning the salary you wish you had in a negative way, your unconscious will put up mental barriers to make sure you don't get there because it'll think you don't want it. If you want to earn six figures, you want $100,000 a year, and every time you hear someone who's earning $100,000, your first thought is to be negative. Oh, what a rip-off. They don't deserve that money. Oh, they're using my taxpayers' money if it's a public servant. All those kind of things will hinder your progression. So that's my first piece of advice is if you want to achieve something, start thinking positively about those who have it and use them as an aspiring goal rather than something negative. Tall poppy is not just applicable to other people, it impacts yourself. Now, money's not everything in this life, but the three goals I'm going to talk about today, they are salary related. And the reason I'm going to use them, I think a lot of people will empathize with that, particularly in these tough economic times. And they're black and white, so it's quite easy to explain how the calculation worked out. But you can apply these techniques to getting a certain position or working for a specific company or changing into a new career, whatever it is you're looking to upskill yourself to achieve. So it doesn't have to be about money, but obviously with a little bit more money comes a little bit more freedom these days with what it costs to live. I brought out the six-figure salary as an example, and it's in the thumbnail for this video because I know a lot of people aspire to that. And for me, the reason I think I'm a good success vision is that I started from, in the minuses. I quit high school with nothing to show for, no formal exams, no certificates. All I had to show for it was, a lot of time spent hanging out with my friends, playing sport, and undiagnosed dyslexia. When I was 16, I thought I'm never going to work in an office. I put that limiter on myself. I've got to be outside, I'm going to be that rough and tumble guy wearing work boots. So I started out as a bricklayer, not even a qualified bricklayer, just carrying bricks, as a laborer for $5 an hour. Today, I run a highly successful multinational training, coaching, and consulting company. So I've come a long way from carrying bricks. And if I can get to where I am today in a controlled manner, there's no reason you can't achieve whatever you're setting out to do. The whole key factor is about turning that dream into a vision for success, setting goals that will help you achieve that, and manageable timelines. So, three key things that I achieved through setting really clear goals that for me really started in my sort of mid-20s. After I'd graduated university as an adult, you'll see in my previous videos, I spent half my life in Japan. So after I graduated university at 28, I went back to Japan and got a job working for a large education group, recruiting Japanese students to go to the university in New Zealand. It was a 100% Japanese company. Myself and the guy I was working with were the only two foreigners in the company at the time. And working with the president of the university, a great man named John Farnslow, Professor Emeritus for Columbia University, recognized as one of the world's leading authorities in teaching English as a second language, so a highly successful man in his own field. I spent a lot of time with him, and he was one of those first successful people I was around that started to recognize my potential and my ability, and he gave me a huge amount of confidence. For so many years, I worked for people I felt like they didn't recognize my potential, starting out with teachers at school calling me a loser and telling me I'd be homeless. But this guy, he'd worked with some of the elites of the academic field, and he was telling me I had a lot of potential. So he often spoke in seminars about setting really concise goals about what you wanted to achieve and making sure they're attainable. So he's the first person who really brought the concept of goal setting into my life. And initially it didn't really sort of click. I probably heard the stories, 2 or 3 times a week for 6 months before I really realized he was talking to me. Even though he was talking to everyone else in the room, I was listening as an observer, but I realized I didn't have really clear black and white career goals. So I started to think about what I was really wanting to achieve. And I'd always had this dream of greatness and being successful, owning my own company, having financial freedom, but I'd never clearly defined what that was. What could I do to achieve a certain level of success? It was all just ambiguous. That would be nice. I'd like to have lots of money. What did lots mean? Right about that time, I picked up a book that I honestly can't even remember the name of it, which was very unusual for me, being so dyslexic. I wasn't a great fan of reading. But I'm going to, over time, your memory fades a little bit about where you got these little tidbits of knowledge from. But I know it was a combination of that book and Dr. John Farnslow. So it was about setting very black and white specific goals that you could judge whether you passed or failed. So John often worked with kids who are looking to go to New Zealand to learn to speak English. And it's very difficult to judge when you've actually learned to speak a language at a level where you think that you've achieved a goal with it. And I'm not a huge fan of tests, but one way to do that is to take a language proficiency test. And in that case, they often use TOEIC, which is a common language testing test for English as a second language, used in Japanese corporations to judge whether their future employees speak English or not. Not a great test because it's just a written test. It doesn't involve writing or speaking. But anyway, so he would encourage the students to aspire to a certain number. I think it was 990 was the full score. Don't ask me why it wasn't 1,000 anyway. So for me, the number that popped into my mind out of the blue one day was $100,000. It was at a point in time when $100,000 a year was a pretty significant salary. It still is today. It's well above the average salary in most countries, but in the context of the cost of living back in the early 2000s versus now, it's quite different. But it's probably, I would say, the equivalent of maybe $250,000 what you could buy for $100,000 then. However, regardless, $100,000 is this number that popped in my head. And within this book, it said you needed to kind of put that number in context, something that gave you belief that you could attain it. And I pondered that question for a long time, maybe a couple of weeks, and I was sitting on a train one day between Osaka and Tokyo, and it popped into my mind. In those days, I was traveling back to New Zealand probably 10 times a year for work, and every time I'd go, I would buy used Japanese golf clubs and take them back to New Zealand and sell them for a significant profit, because for some reason used golf clubs in Japan are very cheap and in New Zealand are very expensive. And that was one point in time where there was an extreme difference, that I was buying a golf driver for $1, a Callaway Warbird driver that was released around the mid-90s or early 90s, that was still going for $100, $150 in New Zealand. I was picking them up for $1 in Japan. So every time I would go back to New Zealand, I'd take back 10 and I'd make $1,000. And it occurred to me, if I sell 1,000 of these drivers in a year, that's $100,000. I could do that. Maybe if even if I wasn't making $100 per club, I would still find a way to make 50, or maybe I buy a more expensive one and I make 200. But the context was buying a product and selling it for X amount of profit and selling X amount of units per year gave me $100,000, which felt completely attainable for me. If I did nothing else but buy and sell golf clubs, I knew I could make $100,000. Now, that didn't mean I wanted to quit my job and start selling golf clubs for a living. It just gave me the reality that actually you don't have to have this really senior position within a company and work ridiculous hours and end up having a stroke from the pressure to earn $100,000. There are various ways to do it. And I had one that I believed was already within my arsenal. Now, the reason I didn't stop it was probably the fact that I wanted to own my own company, and I just didn't feel like selling used golf clubs was that vessel I'd been looking for. And I really found the education sector rewarding. I liked helping people and being paid to do a service that other people's lives changed from. These kids I was recruiting who had no English ability whatsoever, who I was seeing going to New Zealand and within 6 months becoming, able to communicate in English, and their life starting to change. And within 3 years, they were coming back completely fluent with a whole different world ahead of them. That was rewarding, but I had this $100,000 a year number. So within this book, it said, it's I don't even know if they really say it in English, but they always say it in Japanese as the 5 W's and 1 H: when, where, why, what, who, how. Asking yourself these clear questions is, what do you really want to achieve? For me, it was black and white, $100,000. But if I was more specific, it needed to be in a job I enjoyed, with a relatively good work-life balance, that I was delivering value in something that was meaningful to other people rather than just making me money. So, for example, I couldn't go and sell cigarettes. If someone offered me $1 million today, I wouldn't do that. But, that was one of the important values for me. And why was that? It's the money is important to survive, but it's legacy for me, feeling like when I leave this earth that the world is just a little bit better because I was here. That, a few people's lives changed because of something I supported them with, and I'm lucky enough to do that every day. It might not get that much of an outcome with everyone I work with, but every year I see countless examples of people who tell me their lives have changed, and that to me is as important as money. So that was one of the whats and the whys that I generated. I wanted $100,000 a year because I genuinely believed that it would be what I would need to provide a comfortable lifestyle if my wife, who had just married, and I had kids. I thought 2 kids, the same as I grew up in a family with 2 kids, and if we wanted a house, I wanted my wife to choose whether she worked or whether she wanted to stay home and look after the kids. So at the time, $100,000 was the calculation. That was a very clear what and why. When? Well, if we start making kids now, and if I was successful, I figured I had 5 or 6 years before they got to school when the real cost would start to kick in. That was my timeline. I gave myself 5 years. At the time, I was earning about $40,000 or the equivalent. Next was the how. To me, it's really important. If you have a career aspiration, it's generally to do a job that someone else is already doing. So start looking around and finding people around you, either within your organization or externally, doing the role that you would like to be doing, really understanding what is it they're doing, how are they able to do it, what are the skills and attributes they have that can be replicated. Of those, which ones don't you have now? And thinking about in what order you can go about gaining those skills and attributes and the experience so that you deserve that salary when you get there. And that is very controllable. At the end of the day, I genuinely believe when it comes down to salary, income, or a turnover for a company, I heard a person tell me way back in the day, it's fix problems. People will pay to fix problems. So if the problems you fix far outweigh what you charge them, they'll happily pay you, and they'll feel like they've got a benefit. And that's where the first concept of value started to pop into my mind. So it's, how did I create value for myself? How did I differentiate myself with from those around me? New Zealander, European New Zealander, and Japan. At the time, 1% of the Japanese population was non-Japanese, and of those, probably 10%. So we're talking 0.1% of the population in Japan were native English speakers from Western countries. There were a lot of other Asian cultures in Japan, but native English speaking Westerners was probably 0.1% of the population. Of those, many of them didn't speak Japanese. Many of them were working in jobs like English language teaching, and maybe they're transient. I thought to myself, if I can learn more about Japan, more about the culture, more about doing business in Japan, speak better Japanese than any of them, that means I'm going to be in the top 1% of that 0.1%, which means I'll have a distinctive point of difference between all of those other people around me. They'll either be Japanese or non-Japanese who don't understand Japan as well as I do. At the time, I spoke Japanese relatively well, and a lot of people would tell me I spoke well, but I had a very good friend, Brent, if you're watching this, you're who I'm talking about, who spoke amazing Japanese, and it would piss me off when we would go out drinking and I'd be speaking to someone, they go, wow, your Japanese is amazing, and then Brent would pipe up and they would go, wow, that's so much better, and I'd just be like, prick. Not angry at Brent, but just angry at the fact that, my Japanese wasn't as good, so I used him as a success vision. His Japanese was amazingly fluent, and he could portray this character that really amused Japanese people. I figured I've got to learn to do that. So he was a great success vision for me. In the past, I'd get annoyed about it, but I turned that annoyance into a positive vision. If I could be better than him, that would equal being good at Japanese. It wasn't a numerical test, but it was black or white. And it probably took me 2 or 3 years. And I had to immerse myself with all the time being with Japanese people who didn't want to speak English, spending less time with English-speaking foreigners, never watching English TV, cutting off my cable, just watching random Japanese TV shows. That was one of my points of difference. And I really went hard on literally learning the culture. And for a little while there, I probably went too hard thinking I was going to become Japanese, but then realizing I'm never going to be Japanese, but I can become a foreigner who knows them better than they know themselves. That was going to be my point of difference. And I believed that there would be an increasing need for Japan to become internationalized, particularly in business, and then there would be a great need for people who are smart, Western-minded, entrepreneurial people, but those who knew Japan and could operate in that market. So my long-term vision was to become that guy, which I did. But long story short, by applying those clear methodologies, I achieved my goal within 4 years of over doubling my salary by setting clear and concise, realistic goals, setting micro goals along the way to make sure I was progressing the way I should, writing those goals down, telling anyone who would listen what my goal was. So that gave me a sense of commitment that if I don't do this, I'm going to look like a dick. Some people, I've heard people on TikTok and the like, these motivational speakers saying successful people never talk about themselves or their aspirations. They just deliver it. For me, that's bullshit. For me, it's a form of commitment. By you stating out in public that you're going to achieve something, you better do it or you look like an idiot. So for me, maybe they think that, but for me, it was making that commitment and telling people, not everyone, but people like my wife, so I'm going to earn that. Trust me, life might be tough now, but we're going to get there. And I did it in 4 years. Now, one of the other things I did that I'm going to encourage people to do, I'm not a spiritually kind of minded person traditionally, but I kind of believe in karma a bit because I've seen a few interesting twists along the way through great people I've met, through really random coincidences and times and the like. But I read a book about the power of the subconscious around the start of this journey. Don't ask me why. I bought it in an airport. Never read books on a plane, but for some reason the hand reached out and I picked up this book because it wasn't overly thick and it had big words and I could read it. But something attracted me to that book. And within the book, it was a little bit spiritual and I was almost about to give up on it. But the guy said, have you ever had to wake up at a certain time of the day or of the morning and you haven't had an alarm clock and you were able to wake up at that time? So yeah, my mum always used to tell me that if you have to wake up, you don't have an alarm clock, write the time on your forehead. If you've never tried it, do it. Do it tonight. If you've got to wake up at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, set your alarm for 8 o'clock, write 7:45 on your forehead, and I guarantee you wake up before your alarm. And he said that was an example of how your unconscious mind works. So your conscious is when you physically do something. Your unconscious is the thing that makes your lungs breathe, your heart beat, and the like. But he generally believed that you could impact how your subconscious worked And this is getting back to that whole thinking negatively about people who had things that you aspire to, putting up barriers. I have no idea how true this is, but I can tell you from the day I read that, every night since then, before I go to bed, I will tell myself whatever it is that next goal is I'm going to achieve. And for my financially focused salaries previously and now revenue for my company, since that point in time, I have achieved every single growth goal related to salary and turnover for my business that I've said to myself every night. In some stages, I didn't take it. I got to the point where I far exceeded the initial 100K line in my career, and I was offered a job for double the salary to be CEO of a company I'd always dreamed of working for in Japan, a New Zealand company. And it seemed like the dream job, but when I looked into it, the salary is great, but the lifestyle was terrible. And I figured it was going to be a nightmare, which is what a lot of jobs are, pay a lot of money. And at the time, I was earning more than enough. And it was when I'd started to work in this training, coaching, and consulting industry, working for a guy, another one of the key people in my journey, Zia Mohamedjani, the first guy who hired me in the training consulting sector, working for a mentor who saw the potential in me like John Farnslow had, and was constantly helping me add layers to my arsenal, giving me confidence, providing me with constructive criticism that sucked at first, but as soon as I realized when I was able to implement changes that fix the things that he had identified, it was just so awesome to feel the progression and feel the success. So, working for a guy like that and loving my job every day, being able to help people, that was more rewarding than having twice the salary and going working in a rat race. So this thing works, and I still do it today. Positive reinforcement, because it's definitely not going to hinder you. But if you sit there and tell yourself that's too difficult, that's not possible, acting like tall poppy, pulling down everyone around you, it's never going to get you ahead. So there are a couple of other examples I've done this with in my life to show this progression where I've turned dreams into reality, and they're a little bit materialistic, the other two. One of them is this watch. Not sure if you can really see that there. One of the biggest materialistic possessions I've ever purchased in my life. I've never been a brand person, t-shirts with nothing on them or whatever. But on my first week working for the Japanese education group after I graduated from university, I bought myself a $300 Citizen watch. Man, I thought it was crazy because in those days no one spent more than about $10 on a watch in New Zealand. And in Japan it's quite common to spend a lot of money on watches to show success. I went home and my wife kind of chuckled at me and said, "Why did you buy a Citizen watch? The crap." I said, "It's expensive." And she said, "Well, it's not really, but it's all context, right? She's Japanese, I'm a Kiwi, we have different values at that point." She said to me, "Why don't you buy a decent one?" I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm not spending any more money than that. I've only just started this job." So I go to Malaysia a few weeks later for work, and walking through the markets, I see this shiny Rolex there, and it's $100. So I bought myself a $100 Rolex Daytona, a black one with, the silver dials, thinking I was a genius. Walked back into my house when I got home, waiting to see if my wife noticed. And the first thing she said is, "Why the hell did you buy a fake Rolex?" I just looked at her and said, "What do you mean it's not a fake?" Because it actually said Rolex, not like Dolex or one of those. It was a pretty good fake that I couldn't spot the difference with. And she goes, "It's fake." And I said, "What do you mean? How would you know?" She said, "Those watches cost $10,000 to $15,000. You don't have $10,000 to $15,000. I hadn't realized that they were that expensive. Anyway, she said, "If you really want one, why don't you buy this great, your flash watch that you want?" And I said, "No, I can't. I don't have the cash. Like we're, struggling to get by. I'm not going to go waste money on a watch." But it was funny. At that day, I said to myself, one day when a watch I really want that's worth a few $1,000s represents X percentage of my annual salary, and I can buy that watch in cash, and it doesn't take money out of anything else I need to look after my family, I'm going to buy that watch. And the year I turned 40, that calculation came to fruition. So I thought, bugger it, I'm going to buy that watch. And I did. It's a Louis Vuitton watch. And it's part of my whole story about customer service that I'll tell one day about the value of service versus the cost of a product. But I ended up buying this. I had a lot of sleepless nights after I bought it. But for me, it wasn't the fact that I bought it, it was the fact that I had come up with a plan and I applied these principles. And it had taken me probably 10 years to get to that point. And then by wearing this watch, every time I look at it, it was an inspiration to myself that I could reapply that methodology to do it again and do it again and continue to level myself up. To the point I don't need it anymore as a reminder, but I still like to have it. And it still makes me feel good, and I hope one day I can give it to my son with the same kind of message. And the other one I had is a car. I always dreamed of buying a certain brand of car. Never ever thought about buying one for real, unless I won lotto. But then one day I said to myself, the day I can buy that car without a loan for cash, when it doesn't take money out of anything else that I need to do for my family, I'm going to do that. And a few years ago, I had the same calculation, and right at a time that my wife really needed a new car, I bought it for her, not for me, but it gave me that same sense of achievement. In reflection, I didn't need it, but it provided me that sense of achievement that you need to continue to maintain momentum. So these are just some, anecdotal examples of how I applied goals in my life to continue to progress from being a bricklayer for $5 an hour to running a successful company today. Do these things in your context. I'm not telling you that $100 a year, $100,000 a year is a salary you need to aspire to. For you, it may be 50, or for you, it may be $500,000. For you, it may be $100 million revenue for your company. Everyone has their own context, but if you can put a number to it or put a physical black or white, you've done it or you haven't done it criteria to it, it can become a goal. Then you can really got to think about why you want it. What would it mean if you achieve it? Feel in your mind the sensation of when you've achieved that goal and what your life would be like. Create that really clear success vision in your mind like a photo. Write it down in detail. Tell people about it, and that constant reminder and seeing that vision in your mind, reminding yourself before you go to bed every night that you're going to achieve it. Having it on paper, because paper you can't, it's commitment. If you leave things in your mind, you convince yourself and make excuses. But if it's written on paper or you've shared it with someone, it's out there. You're committed to it. Those to me are real key techniques. But then it's thinking about practical, achievable, micro goals along the way that will get you the progression to get to that goal where you want to be. And if halfway there you decide that's not actually where you want to go, change it. That's fine. Just because you've said it, it doesn't mean you have to continue to go. Like the goal I gave you the example, double the salary, company I always dreamed of. I achieved the goal by having that opportunity, and I turned it down because I'd reached a point that to me was more valuable than that initial goal I'd set. That's fine. But if I can do it, you can do it. If you're ever curious about a specific example, about a career move, a position, you want to go to be a manager or a CEO, or you're a CEO and you want to take your company to a certain level of growth, you want to create a company for the first time, send me a DM. I'm more than happy to share some of my time to give you some advice specific to what you're looking to achieve, because so many people like John, like my old boss Zia, like guys like Brent, my success vision for Japanese. There are so many of these people I'll talk about along my way who have helped me on my journey, and I really appreciate what they did. I wouldn't have got to where I am today without them. So I'm happy to pay it forward and to help you people. It can't all be selfishly motivated, but I genuinely believe if you take control right now, start thinking about it, writing it down, the fact that you're going to set a goal, just write down that and take action. Don't wait till tomorrow, because tomorrow never comes. and focus on positive success visions. Stop putting negative impact or negative visions around your dream. If I can do it, you can do it. And if you do it, let me know. I'd love to hear your success stories too. See you next time. I'm Zane Inglis. Thanks for watching. Layers LCG.